my name is Chad Kassem from Acoustic Sounds, and today I'm going to go through a little history about how Acoustic Sounds got started in 1986 and what people used to collect and what we used to sell and what people really wanted back in the day and how things were so much different then than they are now. And I just thought it would be educational, and y'all, like a lot of customers, new customers don't know what used to be cool or what our customers wanted in the old days, you know what I mean? And a lot of this stuff is really cool and still collectible and really great to own. And it's just funny how things have changed so much. And they've changed for the better. I mean, we're very, very happy that the hobby has just continued to grow, and the selection is just unbelievable. How you can get anything from Miles Davis Kind of Blue to all the Verves and Impulses and Blue Notes and popular records. I mean, it's never been better than now. But there was a lot of cool things that came out, and I'll just explain what it used to be like to be an audiophile and what we used to sell. So I moved to Salina, Kansas from Louisiana in 1984, and I started collecting, trying to put my record collection back together. And by about 1986, I started Acoustic Sounds. And what I did was I went home one time to Louisiana, and I visited a friend. And he pulled out some Mobile Fidelities, and he pulled out some Nautilus, and he showed them to me. He goes, "Man, these are awesome. You know, you should buy some of these. They're great." And I'm like, well, you know what? I bought a couple of those records. I bought like the Nautilus, Doobie Brothers, Captain and Me, and the Super Disc, Direct Disc Labs of Jean-Luc Ponty, Cosmic Messengers. And I bought a couple of original master recordings. I forget which ones. And they never blew me away, and I was like, I got some of those. His name was Chet Nixon. And I was like, Chet, I've got some of those records, and I don't see the big deal. They cost 2 or 3 times as much as the regular record, and I don't notice the difference. And he's like, well, listen, Chad, sit right in between the speakers. I'm going to play you an album. Now, you got to sit in the middle. And I'm like, well, why do you want me to sit here? He goes, Chad, just trust me. Please sit here. That way you can hear the sound stage. And then I kept talking. He says, Chad, you're never going to hear anything if you don't shut your mouth. He said, all I'm asking you is to listen to one song. Don't talk. We'll talk after the song. Now, listen, I think you're expecting, the band to jump out of the speakers and start playing live for you or slap you about the face. This is not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is it's going to be very subtle. You'll notice how quiet the vinyl is, how the noise floor is really low and clean and clear, and you'll just hear so much more detail. Now, again, it's subtle, and you have to, that you can only make small differences, but these small differences are huge, so listen more carefully. So I did what he asked. I sat in the middle. I listened to the whole song, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. Unbelievable. I heard exactly what he was talking about, and I lowered my expectations, but I realized the subtle difference was good and nice, and I wanted more of that, you know what I mean? So when I got back to Kansas, again, this is about 1984, I started collecting Mobile Fidelity. So I'll go through the different audiophile labels and some of the things that I collected along the way and what I still buy and sell and trade then and what I still do now. And what was cool then is still cool now. It's just that the new audiophiles have so much more to pick from that they've kind of forget about some of these cool things. So anyway, in 1977, the original MoFi, that was Brad Miller and then Herb Belkin, started 1977, 1978. And so they decided to reissue pop records, classic rock and pop records, and some of them weren't that old at the time, on the highest quality super vinyl pressed in Japan. And the original Mobile Fidelities came with the font like this. The label had like this sunset. Then later the labels changed to be more white with original master recordings on it. So I really started buying and selling. You know, I was working as a cook, and I was buying and selling these records, buy, sell, trade, you know. Find, buy 3, sell 2, trade 1, buy 3, sell 1. And I was just trying to build up my collection, and that's how I started. And it's really what I still do now, you know, because I'm still collecting. And then in about 1991, they quit making the MoFi, it used to MFSL, the original master recordings. They were analog mastering from the original master tapes. And that's what was so great about them. They pressed them, they mastered them off the original tape, and they pressed them on great vinyl. Then they quit making them from Japan probably in about 1985 or 86. And then in 1991, they bought some presses and they started making them in America themselves. So in 1991, they came out with another batch of mobile fidelities, which were called Anadisc. So this was a real good one. And they did the Nevermind was another good one. And some of the other audiophile labels back in the late 70s, early 80s, one was called Super Disc. And it was the name of the company was Direct Disc Labs. They also made Direct-to-Disc, and they made Super Disc. They made Van Morrison, Moon Dance. They made a bunch, about 30 different ones. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So this is the Super Disc label. Then there was another label called Nautilus Super Disc, but with the C. The other one is Super Disc with the K. This Super Disc made about 30. So probably between, I don't know, 78 and 84. And then the Nautilus made about 50. So they did this one. I used to get about $400 for. This one I'd get about $300 for. They made about 50 different Nautilus. They did Allman Brothers, Live at Fillmore, Doobie Brothers, lot of great titles on the Nautilus label. These were all half-speed masters. Another label was Sweet Thunder, and they did about 16. It says editions. This one's number 13. This is Creedence, Green River. They did about 16 Sweet Thunders these around the late 70s, early 80s, pretty much mostly the early 80s, maybe for 2 or 3 years. Here's another one, Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen. Another brand was this Super Cut Nimbus Hi-Fi. And these were from England. They were done for a magazine. They're called Nimbus Super Cuts. They did Sgt. Pepper. They did Joan Armour Trading. They did Ricky Lee Jones. They did some really good ones. This Eagles Desperado, all from analog. Also, there was Direct-to-Disc by Sheffield Labs at the time. There was a lot of direct disc back then that were very, very popular that people loved. Sheffield Labs was one of the main labels, Doug Sachs and Sheffield Labs. So DCC was owned by Marshall Blonstein. Steve Hoffman did the mastering, and Kevin Gray did the cutting. RTI did the pressings. So they're very desirable. They did some great titles. And the first 3 they did was they did some Everest. Really good Everest titles. Now this isn't every DCC, but it's most of them. I think DCC did around 60 records. Again, these aren't all of them, but they did Saxophone Colossus. Then they did Creedence Clearwater, Willie and the Po' Boys, and Tchaikovsky, The Fresh Cream, Elton John Greatest Hits. They did 2 more Everest, Shostakovich. That's the DCCs. Another label that started doing it was CBS Master Sounds. And what they did was, because Mobile Fidelity and Nautilus, it was so popular to reissue these records, they were like, well, why do we reissue it to these other labels? Let's copy what they're doing and start doing the same thing. So the CBS Master Sound, they did Wish You Were Here, they did Thriller, They did Boss Skaggs. They did Toto. They did about 200 different CBS master sounds. A lot of them are really good. Not quite sure they got as popular as the MoFi, but they started doing their own records, and they're fun to collect as well. So back then, a lot of us, we wanted to have every Mobile Fidelity. We wanted to have every Nautilus, every Sweet Thunder, every Nimbus, and all the Sheffield Lab direct-to-disc. And that's what we did. And so again, I started selling these, trying to find them anywhere I could. I would go, every time I'd go to like a big city like Kansas City or Omaha or New Orleans or something, Houston, I would just go to every record store. They had music lands and malls back then. They had record stores everywhere. And they all had an audiophile, not all of them, but most of them had an audiophile selection, an area where they had the audiophile. So you'd walk into the store and you'd say, hey, where's your audiophile selection? They'd say, right there. So I'd go through that at every store, and I just did that on and on and on. And then I found a company in St. Louis that had about 100 to 150 different Mobile Fidelities. And what I did is I took that and I made a list, and I sent out this list, and I said, you can pick any 10 off this list for $100 for all 10, shipping included. So circle 10, send it back, $100, shipping included. And that's how I got started. That's how I started Acoustic Sounds. And boy, I wish I could buy those records back because, but it was great. It was a great deal. And that's how I started. And I put a little ad in the back of Audio Magazine in 1986. And basically I was a cook and cooking for a little more than minimum wage. When I'd come home, I'd open up the mail and look at the money orders and pack records. And that's all I did till I finally started making about 3 times as much selling records. And then I finally was able to rationalize quitting my job. But anyway, that's how I got started selling them. And I owe a lot of gratitude to Herb Belkin and the original Mobile Fidelity label, because that's what encouraged me to buy, sell, and trade, And so we still get these collections. And again, like I said, back in the day, we just all loved to buy, sell, trade, and try to complete the collection, There were some other audiophile labels at the time. There was one called Opus 3, unbelievable sound and recordings. There was Reference Recordings. This one, this Daphos by Mickey Hart, will blow you away. Awesome. By Reference Recordings. There was also Wilson Audio. They make speakers, Wilson Audio. There was that label to buy. There was another reissue company called Alto that did a lot of great stuff from Germany. There was a Super Analog from Japan. These things are totally dynamite, totally awesome. There was things like on Concord, the Ray Brown Solar Energy, which we've reissued. That's unbelievable sounding. There was a label called Chesky that started around the same time. Now this is in the mid to late 80s. Then we also would buy the EMIs, like the EMI Sullivan the Tempest, Massenet Le Cid. This was the label Larita. We sold a lot of this. This was on the TAS list. In fact, all of these, I think, were on the TAS list. This Vaughan Williams, the Lark Ascending and Symphony No. 6. This is an EMI. These are Decas. This is a great sounding Deca right here. Another great sounding Deca. And a really, really awesome sounding Deca that goes for, I think I'd sell this for like $750 back then. So we sold the label EMI, ASDs, Deca SXL, London Bluebacks, Larita. We also sold a lot of RCA Living Stereos, the Shaded Dogs. This one I used to get about $750 for. Also, this was a living stereo that was recommended by TAS, the Absolute Sound, Harry Pearson. So a lot of people wanted to buy records off TAS lists. And that was Harry Pearson, and the Absolute Sound made a list of his recommended recordings. So everybody wanted to find those. So I was always looking, selling the records on the TAS list. So this is Bob and Ray, Witch's Brew, Bang Broom and Harp, Scheherazade. Here's an original Scheherazade. Here's our reissue. Belafonte at Carnegie Hall. Faust Gounod, totally awesome. This one I get about $1,500 for the original. This one's going for over $2,000, the Royal Ballet, which we've also reissued. Classic Records did it, and we also did it on Analog Productions. This I used to get $300 for, Power of the Orchestra. This will blow you away. Also, the Mercury Living Presence. This is the original Mercury Living Presence. This one I used to sell for $1,500, the Hi-File Española, the classic record. This is unbelievable. Here's another record label that came out like in 86, 87, actually 1988. This was big. It's the Rachmaninoff Symphonic Dances. We used to sell a shitload of these, and I also reissued this, but it was the Athena that came out in 88. So this is all at the beginning. For Duke, this was already out of print. This was recorded in 78 and probably out of print by like 1984 or something. This is one of the best sounding records ever made. One of the best sounding direct-to-disc and one of the best sounding records. For Duke was a biggie. It's about a $300 record. Casino Royale, people used to, because this was on the TAS list. This is what people wanted. Hattori was an RCA on the TAS list. The Professional was really rare. This was a $1,500 record. This is another super disc of Judy Collins' Judith. This was on TAS list. Awesome recording. This Vivaldi Lute Concertos was on TAS list. It was on a label called Hungariton. Also, Michael Fremer had a list. And Reissue Jazz, unbelievable recording. That was on Fremer's list and I think TAS. This was on TAS list. This is original Vanguard, Joan Baez. Harry Pearson was mostly into classical, but he loved the Love Over Gold. There was a bunch of Quayex 2 limited edition. We used to look for those. Everybody wanted those because they were pressed on virgin vinyl, Quayex. This is an alto, and this was a highly recommended album, Pop Pop. And then there was labels like Cisco that did some records. Then in about 1989, 1990, I decided to start reissuing my own records. Now, the first one I did was the Massenet Le Cid. This thing, it's got castanettas, the ambience, the dynamics is unbelievable. So what I did is I contacted this label. It was called Clavier, and the guy that had the rights to this, it was an original EMI. So he had the rights in America to this. So he's like, listen, I can't really license you a record I licensed, you know what I mean? But I can make some for you, you know, the same way you want it made, but we'll just keep it, I'll, you know, sell you a finished product. So that's how I got started. So the guy's name was Harold Powell. And Harold was an older guy, and I was probably, 30 years old at the time. And he took me under his wing and showed me how to reissue albums and things like that. But I already knew that I loved Doug Sax and I loved tubes. So we had Doug Sax cut it, and I already knew that I loved RTI, Record Technology Incorporated. So I'm like, listen, Harold, I'll take 5,000 of this Massenet Le Cid. I want it made to my specifications. I want Doug Sax to do the mastering. I want RTI to do the pressing. And I want it numbered edition. And you can buy the original stereo It's called Studio 2 from EMI, Studio 2 version, which is awesome. Speaker's Corner just reissued it. You can buy or you can buy, if you can find the clavier of this. Totally awesome, highly recommend it. But this is where I started in about 89 with this one. Then my first record was this Vanguard, Virgil Thompson, The Plow That Broke the Plain. I did this in 1991. So this is the beginning of Analog Productions, 1991. What I did is I went up to New York to buy a huge collection. And I got up there and it fell through. The guy was a little bit shady. So I said, well, shoot, I'm in New York for another couple days. Let me go visit Vanguard. And I sat down with Seymour Salomon. Seymour Salomon, there was two brothers. There was Maynard and there was Seymour Salomon. And Maynard did the folk and blues, and Seymour did the classical. So I sat down with Seymour, and I said, I want to license The Plow That Broke the Plain. And he's like, well, who are you? And, you know, I was such a young kid at the time. And then I happened to have like $10,000, $12,000 on me cash because I was going to go buy a record collection. So I put the money down on, I says, listen, I'm serious, you know, here, I'll go ahead and prepay. And I mean, he backed away like I'd put a gun on the table, like it was a dope deal or something. You know, it was funny. I can just remember his eyes got real big, even though he was an older guy that's been in the music business forever. But it was kind of funny. I wish I had a video of that right now just to show you. But you can imagine a young kid just getting started and an old master guy who very famous in the music business, recorded Joan Baez, Skip James, Mississippi John Hurt, and tons of classical. Anyway, so he brought me out of the room, and David Baker, the famous jazz recording engineer, was in the other room. And he pulled this album out, and we played the original 3-track tape for me on some Roger speakers. Just blew me away. So this was my first Analog Productions in 1991. So this one is Gottschalk, A Night in the Tropics, and Martin Gould, a Latin American Symphonette. And on this record, this was the second one we did. And when we put this out, we brought this to the Hi-Fi show, and we'd play this record at the Hi-Fi show, and people would clap after the piece. I'd never seen nothing like it before or since. Only a couple times have I ever seen people clap after a record, and it's on this record. And so, again, we had Doug Sax mastered. It was our second release, just unbelievable sounding. Actually, that's our third one. The second one was the Songs of the Auvergne. Now, these were all on Harry Pearson's The Absolute Sound list. And I wanted so much for Harry to love that I was reissuing his favorite records. And he was such a big dog at the time and so busy that he never ever acknowledged what I was doing. You know, I always figured, wow, if somebody reissued my favorite records when there was hardly any records available, that, you know, I would give them a call, you know. But he ended up calling me about 25 years after, and by that time we had already had maybe 100 titles that we reissued. But anyways, we did all three of these from the original 3-track tape, and Doug Sax mastered them. And so these were in the early 90s. So these are what the things people bought. Now here is the Weavers reunion at Carnegie Hall. This was another record that was on the Absolute Sounds list. Now they did the Absolute Sound. They had a fund for recorded music. They kicked in $5,000 for this. So thank you, Harry Pearson. Thank you, the Absolute Sound. This was one of their favorite records, and they did support this record. So while they didn't review many of them, they did help support releasing this record, and I need to remember that. And so this was another record off of the 3-track. I mean, they're in the room with you. Then the first jazz I did, this was in 1992. I called Ralph Kaffel at Fantasy. Fantasy owned Prestige, Riverside, Contemporary, and Pablo, plus their own label Fantasy and the Creedence Clearwater. And I called them and I negotiated for the Contemporary Sonny Rollins Way Out West. So this is the first jazz record we did. Then the second one we did was Waltz for Debbie. The third one we did was Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm Section. Again, we had Doug Sachs remaster all those. Around the same time is when Classic Records started, and they started out with the RCA Living Stereos. They did Brubeck Timeout. They did Kinda Blue. They did about 10 Verves. They did Who's Next. And then he ended up doing Led Zeppelin, the whole Led Zeppelin catalog. So Classic Records did the whole Who catalog, the whole Peter Gabriel catalog, the whole Led Zeppelin catalog, the whole half of the Genesis catalog, and just over 100 RCAs, Living Stereos, and a bunch of great records. I ended up buying Classic in about 2010, I think it was. So Classic Records started in about 1994. So that was, it helped us get from then to now, So again, it started out with the original MoFis, the original Mobile Fidelities coming out in around 77, 78. They went to about 84. Also in that range was the Sweet Thunder half speed, the Nautilus half speed, the Super Disc half speed, and those came out between like 78 and 84. Then they kind of went away. Also in that time were direct-to-disc, like the labels like M&K with Fort Duke, Sheffield Labs with Dave Grusin and Thelma Houston, and also Crystal Clear did Charlie Bird and Virgil and Arthur Fiedler. They did some other things. So there was a lot of direct-to-disc and half speeds. And then there was the Absolute Sound TAS list. Oh, also we sold a lot of Japanese pressings. So back then, that's what people wanted. And that's all we really had, because like in the early 90s, they quit making records, because CDs pretty much came out in 1984 is when they first started coming out. And by 1990, a lot of the big pop artists weren't releasing their music on records. So sometimes you could get the European pressings, and that's why a lot of the European pressings were going for hundreds of dollars a piece if you had, a record, a pop band from the 90s. But now, bring up to date, there's just so many great reissues from Analog Productions and different labels, Cisco, Impex. There's some records that then another person bought, Mobile Fidelity. They call it MoFi now, and they do something called One Step. So it's been fascinating to watch it from the beginning. And I just want to express my gratitude for the labels that came before me that I learned from. And a lot of their records are still fun to collect, and we buy and sell them all the time. It's just funny that the new audiophiles don't know what the old audiophiles liked and wanted. And, we still buy and sell them, and people love them. And, but, the original EMIs and Deccas and RCAs and Mercury, they're still great records, and they're still out there. And we still buy and sell them. And I just thought that it would be fun to do a video to explain kind of the history about how we started and what we used to sell compared to now. Because now, all the major labels have gotten back into it. It's just exploded, and it's the greatest thing. All the big bands are coming back on vinyl, and a lot of them are done really nice and well made. And there's more audiophile reissues now, and there's more records on vinyl now than there's been since 1984. So for that, we're very happy, and it's been very good. But I just thought I would share the history of of Acoustic Sounds and collecting records from 84 till now. So I appreciate the support. Hopefully you got some interesting information and may find some records you enjoy that you can add to your collection. Thanks so much.
Please like and subscribe for more audiophile content.